I have the honor and privilege of introducing Katie Augsburger and Nina Narelle for the session of Being Brave, how to redesign a more equitable employee experience from future work design.
Okay, two things were going through my head. One, I'm kind of obsessed with Stephanie, and two, don't fall down the stairs. So, nailing it. Hi, I'm Katie. Hi, thank you. I like the call and response. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Nina. Hello.
They did that better for you than they did for me.
It's because you warmed them up.
Oh, okay.
You set the bar. You were like, this is the expectation. Call and response is what we're doing. And then they were like, now I know what to do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hi. It's so good to see your faces. It is such a privilege to get to stand here and have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being willing to sit in this conversation with us for the next hour. As Katie said, my name is Nina Narelle. I'm one of the partners at Future Work Design. My area of focus in the work that we do is in organizational design,
We just had
ticketing
lunch.
at inconvenient moments, and our EDI practice, our equity, diversity, and inclusion practice. And I've been doing this work for about 20 years now. And I just have to say, I actually started my career as a community organizer in the Pacific Northwest in the radical environmental movement of the 90s. True story. And at some point very closely after that, realized that if we don't center social justice, we're never going to save this planet. And I'm just so delighted that the conversation about equity and racial justice is being centered here in this space in particular, because I think that without it, we're never really gonna achieve our collective dreams for what's possible.
So, yeah, I would like to introduce myself to you. I am Katie Augsburger. I head up the employee experience work for Future Work Design. I've been doing HR for, let's just say, a little bit of time, because I don't want to date myself, but the truth is, it's been quite a long time, about 15 years. And so feel that it is our systems, our HR systems, that hold so much organizational power, and we're, without dismantling them, we are continuing systems of oppression, which we'll get into today. So, when I talk about future work design, I center this image, and I like to introduce you to this image, because otherwise, probably, what does this mean? This gorgeous woman with flowers in her hair. So let me explain that, where she came from and what she means to us in future work design. So, design is core to our work, as part of our name. So we had some help with the designer to create an image in a collage style, because so much consulting looks and feels very clean, very urban, very like white lines and eggshell chairs and succulents. And that's not who we are. This work is a bit more messy. So I wanted something that spoke to us. We wanted something that spoke to us. And one of the things is we wanted to speak to abundance and sustainability and how that shows up in our work. And also like the bureaucracy, the paper, and just kind of the drudgery of what work often is. And then on this woman's neck, you'll see the pipes from a factory in the Industrial Revolution, to pay homage to where work in this country, where a lot of our systems started. But she herself is what's most important about this picture. I think I'm using this right, so let's see. Oh, yeah. That's where she came from. This is from an article in GQ magazine in 1961. It was all about him and who he was and his power and how cool he is and what work was like for him. And she was there as a prop to tell that story, to show that indeed he's powerful, because there she is to serve him. And that is how we've really centered work, is to tell his story and not hers. And so our work is about bringing her from the margin into the center of that story. And so what we're going to talk about today is a bit about how do we do that inside of our work systems. I'm really good at this button.
Okay, so before we do that, I just want to take a moment to talk about the terms equity, inclusion, belonging, diversity, because we're going to be using those terms. And often in these conversations, people use the term EDI. They kind of tend to use these terms interchangeably, as if they kind of mean the same thing. And there's not really a lot of clarity about why do we use these words, where do they come from, what do we even mean when we say them, other than kind of like a vague notion of like, it's diverse. So we think it's important. The clarity of language is important, both because it focuses our attention, but also because I think it invites all of us to begin to feel empowered and educated to join this conversation. So I want to start with the term diversity. So often in this work, when people talk about diversity, what is implied in how we talk about it is this notion that middle-class whiteness is at the center and the norm, and that the task in front of us is to diversify the spaces that we, speaking as a white middle-class woman, occupy and control. It's often subconscious, but that's often what people are actually saying when they talk about diversity. What we mean when we talk about diversity is the notion that it's important for us to acknowledge and see, truly see, all the diversity that already exists. Diversity is something that already exists. The goal is not to achieve it. It already exists. What we're asking for is for all of us to renegotiate our relationship to it, our proximity to it, where are we positioned in it. So when we use the term diversity, we're talking about all of the diversity that exists and challenging the notions of how and why so many of our social spaces are dominated and controlled by middle white class people and culture. You still with me? Give me a nod. Thank you. Okay. Inclusion and belonging. So our work is really centered on doing this work at work. We're really focused on organizational design. When we talk about inclusion and belonging, I'm going to do that last, actually. Hold on. Let me talk about equity for a second. So what we mean when we talk about equity, I think the simplest definition that I've come across, which I'll share with you today, is this notion that we will know that we have arrived at equity. We know that we will be in the presence of true equity when social outcomes can no longer be predicted by identities and demographics. We are not there. We're not even close. But that's what that means. That's what the full vision and promise of that word is. Inclusion and belonging in the context of work, for me, is tied to both diversity and equity. And I think what inclusion and belonging means is, can we create environments where all the diversity that exists in our communities is welcome, is present, and is powerful, because we are creating equitable systems, and where people feel a true sense of inclusion and belonging. They feel like they belong, and they have power to determine their lives. Okay, so we are going to use the term EDI throughout this talk, but I wanted to just take a moment to kind of unpack what those words mean to us when we use them. Okay.
So I think on an intellectual level, we all understand why this matters to society, especially post-election, we all have this, oh shit, we should probably talk about all of this. Oh, I shouldn't say shit. Okay, too late. But we all have this like moment where we're like, we should probably, white people specifically, we should talk about what's happening. And to Nina's point, we do this at work because we do have a collective understanding of why this is important in society, but organizations sometimes struggle with, why does this matter at work? And what is my responsibility at work to talk about racial justice, to talk about oppression? What is my obligation and why is it necessary? And so I kind of like to walk through, like, what are the reasons we do this? And the reason it usually starts is risk. This is kind of the entry point for most organizations. How do we keep ourselves safe from lawsuits? How do we ensure that that we're meeting the law as it is required by us, dependent on the jurisdiction we live in? So this is often the door that most organizations start with when they care about issues surrounding diversity. I'm using a lot of quotes, but I can't because I'm holding a microphone, so just pretend I'm quoting. Then organizations, you often have them talk about the diversity pipeline, the pipeline into the organization. And that's because we're very clear that the demographics in the country are changing, and so thus the pipeline into the organizations should change with that. So organizations are kind of in this awakening, like, my pipeline should change, I should change my recruiting habits, I should change what my job postings look like, because the demographics in the country are changing. I would like my demographics inside the organization to change as well. But there are other reasons, not just moral and demographic reasons and risk reasons, that this is a really important thing for us to focus on. And you'll see that in a moment. In the meantime, let's just talk about our feelings and how we're feeling today. How was that lunch? Oh, we're good, thank you. So next, if y'all just collectively point, since I'm faced to you, then I'll know. So the unspoken truth, because we are in a capitalist society, is revenue loss. Organizations are very clear about the buyer demographics that are changing, just like the recruiting demographics. And it doesn't look great. Beyonce won't sell her shoes with you if you don't have diverse teams. And that is the reality in a capitalist society, that this is what's leading. Is there is a real revenue tie to not working on your diversity problem. But I think there's two really huge reasons why this is so critical, and we as organizations need to focus on this. Since I've already used the word shit, I'm just gonna keep going with that. Is that cool? Do I have your collective buy-in? Okay, my apologies. You make shittier products and services when you have homogenous organizations. An example of this is self-driving cars that underperform with people of color that are pedestrians. It is AI machines that do passports that assume people of Asian descent have their eyes closed and they reject the photos. You make worse products. You serve communities in a less helpful way if you do not diversify your talent, or if you do not remove the barriers to diversity for your talent. And when you create worse product, you perpetuate inequities, because you then create products that only serve those that hold dominant culture identities, and it further perpetuates access for those on the margin. So by keeping your organizations homogenous, you are in fact not just slightly problematic, you are actually contributing to the detriment of our society. Sit with that for a moment. Think of whatever self-work you need to do to think about that, but that is the truth of it. Because you're creating products for dominant culture that serve dominant culture and further pushes those that are already hold marginal identities further into the margins. So it requires us to think about how our organizations talk and think about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it forces us to start thinking about where our organizations sit and how embedded these conversations are in our organization.
I just want to warn you that I am about to show you a 5-step linear model. In no way am I suggesting to you that this is how reality works. No, I'm not. I'm not suggesting this is progressive. I'm not suggesting it is linear. So just brace yourself. The reason I'm showing you this model is because I think models do help us in a way, in that they simplify things that are very complex. So we're here to talk about employee experience and what it means to design equitable employee experiences inside of our organizations. I think that one thing that can be helpful for organizations as they're contemplating, well, how do we do that and what does that look like, is to have something to reference against to understand, well, where are we today? What's motivating this work today? How do we think about it today? Where are we investing our time and activities? Where does the work of DEI live today inside of our organizations? So my intent is to show you this framework. I'll say it one last time. Not because this is a linear process, but because I'm hoping it will simplify something that's actually very complex enough for you gesturally, in the moment, to ask yourself the question, where do I think my organization is today?
It's the big green button.
Thank you, Katie. I got totally overwhelmed. I was like, I don't understand this. Okay, so similar to what Katie said about, why do we do this work, compliance. So often, many organizations, like kind of the base layer of their EDI work is compliance. It's compliance driven. So it's about risk mitigation, and they may talk about diversity, but really if you look at what activities are happening and what's motivating this work, it really is about compliance with the law and making sure that they don't get sued. Got it, but thank you. I feel supported. 2, we celebrate diversity. So I'm going to read this to you because I think it's kind of hard to see in this light. There's an understanding of the importance of diversity. The importance of having diverse talent has been communicated, and early diversity initiatives are created. So what this looks like is kind of we celebrate diversity. Diversity is a thing we want to achieve. It's a musical. It kind of has that feeling like we love diverse people and want them to be here. We want to recruit them into our wonderful universe of white middle class dominant culture. Come, join us. It's fantastic.
There's usually a potluck involved.
There may be even food celebrations. 3, we have a business case for diversity. There's an acceptance that there are business benefits for diversity. Diversity initiatives primarily focus on something I can't read right now. But the emphasis of the state, I just suddenly had a panic attack, like, oh my God, do I remember? If I have to read through that, I'm gonna freak out. Whew. Okay, there it is. Diversity initiatives are heavily focused on recruiting. So again, bringing people in, but now you're seeing more recruiting actually happening. And metrics are starting to be established. So there's a little bit more accountability around the work. It's not just kind of like, we love it. It's like, we're serious and we're tracking it, we're collecting data. And we are getting diverse. So theatrical today, I'm not sure why. Next is we're creating a culture of belonging. So again, for majority cultural institutions that have kind of already gone through this recruitment stage, then there's this moment of we want everyone to actually feel welcome here. What does that look like? Oftentimes a majority cultural organization that comes after having a lot of failure with the diversity program. And there's often kind of this moment of oh, do we understand why people don't want to stay here? What does it look like to create a place where people actually feel welcome and included and powerful? So the focus starts to broaden from recruitment to retention, leadership development. Investments start to be made around shifting policies and procedures and behaviors. You start to see kind of, oh, this isn't just about consuming diversity into a majority culture organization. We are going to have to change. And number 5, equity, diversity, and inclusion is a strategic lens. So the organization has fully operationalized a lot of these EDI efforts, regularly reviews their policies and practices with an equity lens. And I think more importantly, it's understood that EDI is not like a its own kind of work stream that lives in parallel to other things, that lives in a department or a function, but rather like this is a lens to view every decision that you make. Okay, so I just tried to simplify something. Remember, not a linear world, not a linear process. I'm getting into the mic, I can feel the feedback. But hopefully helpful to allow you to assess like, ooh, where do I think my organization is on this journey?
Nina, can I ask? Can I pause? We're in a brave space. You've made friends. I'd be curious where you think your organization is. And I don't mean you personally, because I'm sure you'll be like, I'm a 5 because I care, which is great. Thank you. But your organization, where do you think your organization sits on this?
Are you gonna do a roll call? How are
I'm
they
just
gonna
gonna put
tell
your
you?
hands in the air.
But how will they know for what?
Like they look at the number here, and they're like, I'm a 5 or a 4.
Oh, you did the number.
Yeah,
Cool.
they got it. They figured it out. Okay, a lot of 3s, some 2s, some 1. Okay. I've not seen a 6. Oh, okay, you vacillate between 4 and 2. I was like, not 6.
Thank you,
Okay.
because it's not linear.
Yeah, so for some of you in your organization, you may have parts of especially if you're a very large organization, you may have parts or departments that are much further along. Your management and leadership team might be at 1s and 2s. Does that sound accurate?
Okay, so we're talking about employee experience design, right? It is possible to think about employee experience and designing it in service of equity, diversity, and inclusion at any of these stages. But what your intent is behind it and how complicated or messy, in a good way, your analysis of the problem is, like what are we actually trying to do? What does success look like? Will vary depending on where you are on this. And obviously our intent and our wish is that everyone would be at a 5. If we did this at work, we would transform our society. And we recognize that that's not the case today in most organizations. And that our recommendation to organizations is that they do the work to truly experience all of these different layers. And they may come at different times and different stages, right? It's not a fully linear process. But how we're going to approach the conversation today is going to be encouraging you to operate at these later stages. So there's 2 kind of big ways we do this. The first one is personal. So we're going to spend a lot of time well, not a lot. We only had an hour. But we're going to really focus our time talking about the structural pieces to this work. But I want to say that this is deeply personal work. If we are to successfully do this in our organizations, it is going to require that all of us, especially those of us who have identities that are privileged in the mainstream, and to be very specific, white people, are going to need to really deeply interrogate how our experience of whiteness forms how we move through the world and how we understand it. As a white person who has spent a lot of time doing that and doing this work, the thing I would like to offer to you is this. I want to suggest to you that if you really commit to go on that journey, that it will transform your life in miraculous ways you could not anticipate. It will offer you the opportunity to align your impact and your intent, which leads to a much richer and satisfying life. It will offer you deep relationships that you didn't even really know you were missing. It's very transformational work. And I think often in the early stages of this work, it can feel intimidating, it can feel scary, and it can feel overwhelming. And often people get kind of paralyzed in a sense of either guilt or like anxiety that they're going to do it wrong. So if you've ever experienced that, I want to just offer to you the suggestion that you are absolutely going to do it wrong, you're absolutely going to get it wrong, you're absolutely going to make mistakes, you're absolutely going to fuck up.
Oh, that was way worse than every. Just to clarify.
The good news, that's not actually the goal. The goal is to learn from and be resilient in the face of those mistakes. And I'm saying all of this to say that this work is foundational and it's absolutely required. This is not a task that you can learn or an item that can be on a plan. This is all of us changing how we show up together. And it's deeply based on your identity, and the work that there is for you to do is different based on your identity.
And that's why I'm so glad that you grounded your day with Stephanie's, who was amazing, again, heaven. That was the universe confirming what I just said. Heaven.
I agree.
But grounding yourself in the fact that this is personal transformation work. Because what we're going to talk about next cannot be done unless you are willing to have done the work that she discussed earlier today. You have to do the work in your personal life. And it looks very different for people who look like Nina versus people who look like me. The work that we encourage Black and brown people to do is about self-care, advocacy, learning how to take up space when you've been told you shouldn't, things of that nature. But basically, talk to Stephanie, she does that way better. We'll talk about the institutional stuff now. So, I'm punchy. It's all that delicious food. Okay. So this work lives in the personal and the institutional. And for us, what that looks like is the policies, like the actual policies. What is your PTO policy? What is your parental leave policy? The policies in your organization. What are the practices? Who decides what professional is? Who decides what good performance is? What is good performance? How do we show up in a meeting? What is a normative way that we communicate via email, and who makes that decision? The resource flows. How does communication, time, and money flow through the organization? Who gets access to that? Are we funding affinity groups? We're putting time and energy into our stated values? What are the relationships and connections within the organization? How does that work through the organization? And what are the power dynamics, both soft power and hard power, that people hold? Who holds power? What are the identities of those that hold power? Who does not hold power? Or if they don't hold power, what power do they have? How does that look? How does that show up? This is the work that we often find ourselves in, is this institutional work. And just like with that personal work, people might understand it conceptually, but they don't know the how. Like, yeah, well, I just got my policies from the SHRM website, so I think it's good. You know, people don't know what is in my systems that could be problematic? What could be the barriers to an equitable organization in just these things?
Can I add something?
Please add something.
Our point of view on this is similar to the slide that you saw with the GQ magazine photo. And our our belief is that so many of the pieces around the employee experience design and kind of organizational design decisions often actually really get overlooked because we're just complying with the status quo. It's like, well, that's just how it works. We got it from the SHRM website. It must be fine. We're in compliance. This isn't where this lives. But it absolutely lives there. It absolutely lives there.
Yeah. No, thank you. 100%. Because when we actually look at those systems and we say, who are they created to support? They were created to support those that the system was created to support. Elite, educated, white, upper middle class, men. But we call them top performers, so it's okay. So like, it's just for a top performer culture. That's coded language. Stop that. Okay, this is the dramatic pause I was hoping for. So people say to us, I don't know how. I do not know how. Because these are the systems that I've been taught, especially if you're HR. How many HR folks are in here? You're my people. All right. Can HR folks put your hand up one more time? Can I have a private conversation with you for just one moment, for 2 minutes? The rest of you just check out for a second. HR folks. Most of you are white ladies. Almost all of HR systems were created by white ladies. We're having a moment right now where you're being reminded that your role in society is to police behavior, right? Barbecue Betty, all of that stuff. Do not bring that into HR, because that is why HR has a reputation for being the police. We have created our own problem, and we're creating harm within organizations. So this part is for you. Okay, everybody can check back in now, so if you're stop listening, the HR talk is over. That was impromptu, but I felt like we needed to have that talk. So people ask us, how do I change these systems? And what we do is we ask people to think about, again, who is this created for? Who is part of the process and the design? Who is left out of the design of this process? We create tools in order for people to do that. It's one of the things we do. And actually, that was supposed to be what we were doing today, but there's more of you and less of us, and we can't do 200 people through this workshop. But for us to be really clear that these were just design choices. How we recruit was just a design choice. How we talk about compensation in our organization, just a design choice. If we're going to really radically transform our organizations from a 1 to a 5, we have to redesign those systems to put those that hold marginal identity into the center of that and meet their needs. So for those of you that have heard me talk, the story will be familiar. That's okay, most of you haven't heard me talk, so it's fine. But we have to do this. We have to create systems for those at the margins, because it creates a better work experience for everyone. And so people will often be like, well, this seems like a lot of effort. Like, do we really have to redesign our whole compensation system to help one type of person? Well, yes. Also, yes, you do. But also, it makes it better for everyone. Everyone's life improves when you create systems for those that have had the least access. And a great example of this is post-war America, soldiers returning from war in Michigan, and the outrage people felt about the idea of creating clear pathways between streets so that people with war injuries could easily move from one sidewalk to another. Outrage. How dare us spend money for this small group of soldiers returning from war also get your shit together. But when they created these curbside cutouts, life improved for everybody. People pushing strollers, people moving heavy objects, people stumbling drunk from clubs, everybody. Everybody's life improved when we made an accommodation for the person that was most marginalized or most harmed and had the least access. So when we work with organizations, it's about saying who has the least amount of access to power, to positional authority in your organization, and what do we have to do in order to get them into the mainstream? We will create that system. That is how we're going to now talk about performance reviews. That is how we're now going to talk about compensation in order to serve that team, that group. So here are some of the areas that you should be thinking about. Compensation. How transparent is your compensation? Is it completely closed? Who does that serve? What is your retirement program? How do we take care of people when they've exited the organization? What is our moral obligation to do that? How do we bring people onto our organization? How do we make sure that they understand the norms? And how willing are we to flex our norms when they come on board? I have to keep turning around because I don't have these memorized. Training. Who do we provide training dollars to? What do we provide training dollars for? Do we only give training dollars for hard skills? Or are we willing to invest in the soft skills? How do we terminate employees? How graceful are we with those exits? What have we normalized in the termination process? What have we just said is okay? They're leaving anyways. Who and how do we promote? What behaviors are promotable behaviors? Do we promote people who have shown leadership qualities in affinity groups? Or do you have to have a traditional leadership path in order to promote? Who are benefits made for? Are they trans inclusive? Do they provide partnership benefits? Do we have good care for Black mothers? What recruiting looks like, not just where you post. It's a whole other workshop. It's not where you post. I'm just gonna say that. So many times it's like, where do we post so that Black people will work here? Black people know how to find jobs. It's not the problem. They're not the problem. All right. Sorry. It's how you're posting. It's different workshop. Performance. What does good performance look like? How are we measuring performance? How do we give performance feedback? How do we challenge performance feedback? How do we give performance feedback on our leadership? Who listens to that? Rewards. What are the other types of rewards besides compensation that we give? Who has access to that? How much information do we share? How transparent are we with that? And improvement. This is really important, and a lot of organizations don't do this. I would encourage you to. Take metrics of your PIPs. Who is on performance improvement plans? We know that this happens in school, that Black children get detention at a higher rate than white children. I bet it's happening in your organization. Pay attention to performance improvement plans. Pay attention to performance improvement plans. I will challenge you to say that in your life. It is very hard. Try saying it on stage. Good luck. How do we measure performance? For those of us that have had a performance improvement plan, what chances do we give them? What coaching, what advice, what mentorship? All of this is the boring, unsexy work in which oppression lives. If you want to move the needle on creating an equitable system, you have to do the personal work, and you have to look at these systems, because these systems are causing harm right now in your organization.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. You probably are already reading the steps, and you're probably anticipating what's happening. I'm going to ask you to talk to someone next to you, and I'm going to ask you to pick one of these elements from your organization to have a conversation. Think about who created this. So who, like, maybe you even know their names. Maybe it was created 150 years ago. I don't know. Who created it? Who defined how this part of your system works? Whose needs were centered in its creation? Spoiler alert, if the answer is, I don't know, don't you? Okay. Does it sustain the status quo? See above. If you don't know, don't you? And how might you redesign? For those of you who don't work in HR, you might be like, I don't know. Well, I don't know. You came to this workshop, so maybe you have some influence. So we're short on time, so I'm going to ask you to just start this conversation, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And then we're going to ask you to volunteer to tell us what you said, so be prepared. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
We would love to hear from a few of you in 20-second sound bites what that was like and what you surfaced.
I'm particularly curious to hear if anyone's like, yeah, actually, we just redesigned this thing and it's kind of amazing. Because probably people would like write some ideas down, like, yeah, that's good. And then if anyone's like, oh, I just realized I've never thought about this before, and I had this big insight.
Venture to guess that's more of you. If any of you did redesign your whole compensation system in the last 30 seconds, please share it. Just raise your hand.
How about if you want to tell us something, you raise your hand. I would really like to hear how the conversation go.
Feel brave. Literally, we're standing on stage singing Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga songs. So if you can't feel as brave of us, feel brave.
Be brave. That's the name of the workshop.
Be brave. That's actually the name. Okay. So, lovely lady at the front named Sophia. Hi.
Wait, there's a mic coming for you.
Oh, shit. Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. I'll say we, as you know, do strategic design with companies to design this stuff, but as a sole prop moving to S Corp, moving to B Corp, I've taken on my colleague here, Mark, and we did decide, we've been in the process of moving to there just to block out a couple days at our retreat to co-design it. So it's not just about me and my childcare needs, whatever, but it is about something greater. And we were like, I wonder if Nina's back from vacation to help us facilitate this, but whatever. So good. Thanks, guys.
Good job. Thank you. Thank you for being brave and sharing first. Others? Oh, thank you. Fantastic lady in the middle back.
Hello. I work for Turnkey Marketing and Promotions, and we have a pretty cool reward system for our brand ambassadors out in the field. So we hire people around the United States, and we want to show them that, they're doing a good job each week. So instead of giving like money or like bonuses for cash, which kind of gets complicated with taxes and things, we send them gifts and handwritten notes each week for the people who've done the best job. We do feel like, our president and founder obviously created the idea, but we all created the process together in our yearly retreat. And I feel like it does center around them and like what is best for them and what would make them most motivated to do a good job each week and really strive to do their best and feel really part of the company, even though they're not internal, they're out in the field. And I think that is kind of our redesign.
Thank you. So an example, I'll give you a quick example of a process that is very atypical. We've all heard of this. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, is organizations that ask for a redesign of nursing rooms. So just to ground you in what this means. So Oregon law mandates that employers of a certain size have space for lactating mothers to express their milk. And for those of us who have been a lactating mother prior to this bill, you might remember, as I do, doing this, expressing your milk in a bathroom stall and carrying your milk to a refrigerator. It was super gross, but it was what was done. And now it's vastly improved because now we have a broom closet for women to go to. Stay over there, get in this broom closet. But when I ask people about who was centered in this process, whose needs were centered in the design of this, it was like, oh, well, women. It's like, but was it? Because we have our partner who expresses her milk on the daily right in front of us. Doesn't bother me. I would venture to guess that the needs of men were centered in the creation of that design. Because if we actually centered the needs of those people who were most who most needed it, who had the most barriers, maybe we would allow them to bring their babies to work. Maybe we would normalize pumping in the office. If we centered their needs, our design would look very different than just a more comfy chair in a broom closet. So it's really about pulling back away from what is known and getting really clear about, like, what is compensation? What is the role of compensation in our organization? What does it actually do? What is the role of performance management in our organization? What is the real goal of that? If the real goal is growth, then why do we need to document all of the performance for HR file? If the real goal of compensation is for people to understand clearly how their pay connects to their performance or to the job to be done, why is it such a secret? So you really want to get clear about who it was designed for and who's it centering and serving. I don't know where to stand. It's very confusing. Okay, oh, we are out of time. Hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, we are Future Work Design. I felt like there should be a better transition.
Thank you so much for having us.
That was it.
Thank you.
Thank you.